Can I plug this in?
Okay, we may start. Hopefully, the last session, the last lecture today will be given by Dr. Bogdan Iancu from the University of Bucharest. The floor is yours.
This will be a lecture primarily about constitutionalism. Constitutionalism is important in terms of the economic crisis in two ways. Meaning, the economic crisis makes apparent and perhaps enhances certain constitutional deficiencies of the Union. At the same time that the ability or inability to come up with a coherent constitutional structure in the European Union will be effective in terms of how the crisis will or will not be tackled successfully. One can already see that in terms of the two treaties that have direct relevance to the crisis, meaning the Stability Pact and the ESM, the Fiscal Pact, and the ESM, the Stability Mechanism, because both of these treaties are international public law treaties concluded outside the framework of the European Union. And at the same time, their implementation involves Union institutions, the Commission, the European Court of Justice, and the European Central Bank, but outside of the Union framework. So you can already see the problem. Now, Constitutionalism appeared in the wake of the Enlightenment, as you know, the end of the 18th century. Not constitutionalism as such, but normative constitutionalism, meaning constitutionalism in a modern form, implying a foundational law that regulates the conditions for legality, meaning the production and legality of subsequent norms, and the conditions of legitimacy, meaning the validity of public acts that are adopted. First constitutions that you know appeared in late 18th century. In the United States in 1787, in France in 1791. At the same time as the normative constitution appeared constitutionalism. Constitutionalism being a set of umbrella concepts to which constitutional system should correspond. You have often heard of them. Separation of powers, the rule of law, fundamental rights, judicial review, representative democracy, judicial independence. Now, all of these concepts, even though sometimes they were mentioned in constitutional documents, for example, the 1789 French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen says in Article 16 that any system where the separation of powers is not guaranteed and where fundamental rights are not respected has no constitution at all. Not one de constitution. But this was meant in a very general term, and the terms of constitutionalism served for a very long time only as a general vocabulary for contestation and change within the nation state. Why? Because they're prescriptive, meaning the common denominator in terms of prescriptive solutions for constitutional systems is minimal. Let's take judicial independence. Judicial independence presupposes as the lowest common denominator to which all systems should correspond inamovability of the judges, meaning that the judge cannot be removed from office even if promoted without his or her own agreement. But outside of that, there are no guarantees to which all systems correspond. You find one kind of system of judicial organization in Germany, another one in France, where administrative courts are part of the Conseil d'Etat, so they're not part of the regular court structure. In some systems, you find protections for judicial salaries. In the United States, for example, the prohibition of diminishment of judicial salaries is entrenched in the Constitution. But outside this minimal court, inamovability of the judges, if you look at all constitutional systems, you will find nothing more than that. Okay? Civil society is a notion that appeared at the same time as constitutionalism and the normative constitution rose. Civil society is not a part of the vocabulary of classical constitutionalism. It appeared in Enlightenment works, for example, in Ferguson, only to indicate that between the state and society there should be an interface of associations that guarantee the formation of public opinion. Some political theorists, Tocqueville most notably, made a link between the functioning of representative government and of the constitutional system and civil society. Tocqueville says in Democracy in America, as you see the quotes are provided there, that in the United States the representative government functions because of the ability of people to coagulate in civil associations. This is why the representative government can function in the United States. He says that the ability to combine, the knowledge of how to combine, is the mother of all other kinds of knowledge. Now, towards the second part of the 20th century, in the last decades of the 20th century, a new notion appears, meaning, even though it's expressed differently in different doctrinal sources, that of global or international or supranational or transnational constitutionalism. To what kind of organizations was it applied? Well, to the WTO in the wake of the Uruguay round, the appearance of the judicial, the dispute settlement bodies, to the Council of Europe as a result of the European Court of Human Rights jurisprudence, sometimes even to the United Nations as such, and probably most of all to the European Union. Now, with the migration of constitutionalism to the global stage, appears another phenomenon. Firstly, you have older concepts such as separation of powers, the rule of law, judicial independence, and so on, which become prescriptive at the global level, meaning that either they serve as an interface between constitutional systems, and in some cases they are used from a supranational or transnational level to gauge the fitness of national constitutional systems. One example is the Copenhagen criteria of the European Union, the criteria adopted in 1993 to evaluate the fitness of a new member state in political and constitutional terms to be a member of the European Union. What kind of guarantees does a state have to afford in order to be accepted as a full member? Now, another phenomenon, aside from the change, the shift in meaning of vocabularies and the appearance of directly prescriptive constitutional concepts, such as separation of power, judicial independence, and so on, you have new vocabularies of a kind of surrogate constitutionalization, meaning that in terms of transnational or global constitutionalism, you have a new set of concepts or notions that are being used. One of them is civil society. Others are integrity, transparency, anti-corruption. The European Union, as I said, is the primary example, is the embodiment of supranational constitutionalism. First, the notion was used in jurisprudential discourse, meaning that the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, in the first cases in the 1960s, Costa versus Allen van Gendenlos, referred to the institutive treaties as creating an international organization, but different from other international organizations. They said at that time that the EU is different from other kinds of such organizations insofar as the member states have ceded parts of their sovereignty. Okay? Even though for limited purposes, but once they have done that, they cannot withdraw their decision. That cession is final, and it is bestowed upon the Union institutions which can measure, which can gauge the scope of the transfer. This was enunciated in the cases that declared the EU law, directly applicable EU law, primarily regulations, of course, to have direct effect and preeminence, supremacy over national law, in some cases even over national constitutional law, for example, in the Simmental case. Now, if in the first cases the ECJ referred to the EU as an international organization different from other organizations, in future jurisprudence it started to use the word constitution expressly. One example is the case that had to do with campaign contributions to the European Parliament, Parti Ecologiste Les Verts versus European Parliament, when they mentioned the EU instituted treaties as creating a constitution of the Union. Now, of course, using as such the word constitution has an uplifting effect, meaning it implicates the fact that the European Union is a self-standing political unit, different but on an equal par with the member states. At the same time, the treaties evolved, as you know, into ever more close integration. And the peak of this movement towards constitutionalization by treaty amendment was the failed attempt to adopt the Constitution Treaty of 2004. Now, the Treaty of Lisbon, even though it doesn't mention the word constitution as such, and it gave up all the constitutional paraphernalia that could be found in the Constitution Treaty of 2004, it includes all the operative provisions, meaning there is a shift towards majority. The triple majority with weighted votes was given up, and effective of the 1st of November 2014, we have a system of double majority of member states and population, 55-65, aside from initiatives that come from other institutions than the High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and the Commission, which have to be adopted by 72% of the member states. There is also a notable shift towards parliamentarization. Now, the co-decision procedure, which existed previously, is called the ordinary legislative procedure, and it applies to almost all areas of EU lawmaking. There are entrenched fundamental rights in the Charter, and there is also a commitment of the European Union as an institution endowed with legal personality to adhere, to accede to the European Convention for Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms. There are many such changes. I only gave a few examples. Perhaps the most striking change is the so-called dynamic treaty amendment and dynamic provisions, meaning that usually in international organizations, in order to amend the instituted treaty, you have to convene an international public law conference, such as an intergovernmental conference in the case of the European Union, and negotiate a new treaty, and then adopt it, and then ratify it in the member states. In the European Union, you have modifications of the instituted treaties within the treaties. For example, you can adopt a treaty amendment by virtue of a unanimous decision in the European Council, and you can change the procedures by way of a unanimous decision. For example, you can shift from a special legislative procedure which gives less rights to the Parliament to the ordinary legislative procedure which puts the Parliament on a par with the Council. Or you can shift from decisions that are adopted by unanimity in the Council to decisions which in the future will be adopted by majority. So these are momentous changes in the structure of the EU. Now, for such changes to be operable and accepted by constitutional systems of the member states, of course, you also need to lift legitimacy guarantees. And if you look at Article 10 in the Treaty on the European Union, as amended after the Lisbon Treaty, the EU Lisbon, you will see that it reads, the functioning of the Union shall be founded on representative democracy. Citizens are directly represented at Union level in the European Parliament. Now, representative democracy is used in the Instituted Treaty of the Union. But that is only a half-truth. Why? Because if there is a common denominator of what representative democracy means in all constitutional systems in the world, it is the rule that votes are equal. One man, one person, one vote. In the European Union, we do not have that because of the system of digressive representation in the European Parliament, which produces huge disparities in terms of the ratio of representation. A German MP represents 10 times less European citizens than a European member of Parliament from Luxembourg, Cyprus. Okay. So the notion as such is used, but it is used in a way which is completely different than the accepted meaning of representative democracy in classical constitutionalism. Due to this problem, the treaty acknowledges the fact that it has to provide supplementary means of legitimization, which is why in the very next article, Article 11, civil society is mentioned and transparency guarantees are provided. The institutions shall maintain an open, transparent, and regular dialogue with representative associations and civil society. Now, the notion of civil society also is mentioned in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. You see Article 15, which reads similarly as Article 11 in the TEU. And you even have European Union institutions, which are composed of members of the civil society organizations in the member state, the Economics and Social Committee most notably, and the appointment process has to take into account, as you can see from the articles on the PowerPoint slide, in agreement with the civil society representatives from the member states. So you have an attempt to make do for this changing vocabulary. The Union is founded on representative democracy, but representative democracy that functions in a completely different way than in nation-state constitutions, by providing supplementary or surrogate forms of democracy. Transparency, civil society, citizen initiative, the involvement of member state parliaments in certain procedures at the union level. The question is whether that functions. And so far, one can notice tensions both in respect of established constitutional systems of all the member states and in respect to the way in which the Union interacts with newer member states. In the case of Germany, for example, the German Federal Constitutional Tribunal rendered a decision in which it explicitly criticized the amendments proposed. As you can see, they speak of a deficit of European public authority that exists when measured against requirements of democracy in states cannot be compensated for by other provisions of the Treaty of Lisbon, and to that extent, it cannot be justified. And they also explicitly refer to the problem of civil society in the second paragraph. These are paragraphs 289 and 290 of the decision, in which they also criticize the excessive degree of federalization, in German, the over-federalization, and state that besides the elements of complementary participatory democracy, such as the precept of appropriately providing its citizens of the Union and representative associations with the possibility of communicating their views, the Treaty of Lisbon also provides for elements of associative and direct democracy, Article 11, Lisbon TU. They include the dialogue between the institutions of the Union and representatives in quotation marks, associations and civil society, as well as the European Citizens Initiative. And then criticism continues in the same abrasive tone as this paragraph. And this is an operative part of the decision. The decision declared unconstitutional the accompanying laws to the law, the federal law that ratified the Treaty of Lisbon, accompanying laws that prescribe the rights of the Bundestag, the lower house, and the Bundestag, the Federal Council, with respect to actions taken by German delegates in the European Council and the Council of Ministers. So it seems that this is an irreconcilable tension from the perspective of an older member state constitutional tribunal. You can see the same kind of problems at the level of newer states of the Union. I'm providing the Romanian example, but you can, this is just an exemplification of a larger trend. Similar problems that appear in terms of entrenching the Copenhagen criteria in Hungary and in Bulgaria, in other member states, so the 2004 wave of recession. The Romanian constitution in its 1991 version provided for a superior council of the magistracy. Superior council of the magistracy composed of prosecutors and judges elected by the Senate. There was no procedure for election provided explicitly in the article of the Constitution. And as you can also see, there is no provision for the number, the functioning of the Superior Council of the Magistracy, aside from its being empowered to act as a disciplinary council for judges alone. In 2003, we adopted amendments to the Romanian Constitution at the behest of the European Union. These amendments were to provide a constitutionally entrenched setting for judicial independence, for an independent judiciary. Now, mind you, these modifications, the amendments in 2003, were adopted at the direct request of the European Commission as a part of our transposition of the Copenhagen criteria, and they correspond to regular Commission requests in the pre-accession country reports. So we changed the Council now, we made it completely autonomous from politics, and aside from prosecutors and judges, which are now not elected by the Senate, by the upper house of our parliament, but elect themselves in judicial and prosecutorial caucuses. You have also two representatives of the civil society, which are selected by the Senate. Now, the Commission asked us to render both the prosecutors and the judges as a corporate association autonomous from politics, because to a certain extent, because at that time in the 2000s, there were significant political pressures on the judges and on the prosecutors, but also to a certain extent due to the inability of the union, of the Commission, in the case, to prescribe an actual institutional setting. Right? They said that this would guarantee judicial independence. Now, this immediately created another set of problems. Why? Because even though in the Romanian case, prosecutors and judges are considered both magistrates, prosecutors are different from judges. They form a hierarchical organization, and in other parts of the Constitution, in the previous two articles, they are explicitly referred to as a structure, as a public ministry, meaning an executive structure. And it is also stated in Article 131 that they exercise their attributions under the authority of the Ministry of Justice. So, if before 2003 there were significant political pressures on judges and prosecutors, after 2003, a politically autonomous structure was created that started to exhibit indirect politicization and factionalism coming from within the judiciary. Another problem that was created was the lack of knowledge of what exactly to do with the members of the two civil society representatives, because they participate only in plenary sessions, and aside from the fact that they can only take part in the plenary session, so they do not take part in the judicial and prosecutorial disciplinary sections. It is unclear as to how they can be selected. Civil society does not, the notion as such does not provide a clear framework for selecting these two members. However, this opened the possibility for further manipulation of the Council. And if you look at constitutional revision initiatives from 2011, that of the President, and the constitutional revision initiative which is pending now in the Parliament, the attempt is constantly being made to increase the number of civil society representatives. Why? Because these are elected by a politically controlled body, so this can change the configuration of votes in the Superior Council of the Magistracy. Initially, the President supported constitutional revision, a constitutional revision which should include 5 prosecutors, 5 judges, and 6 representatives of the civil society. Okay, 3 appointed by the Parliament, 3 by the President, and also opened the possibility of a civil society representative to be elected from within the Superior Council of the Magistracy as president of the council. This was stifled by the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court granted a decision on the amendment initiative, stating that such a change would be unconstitutional because it would impair judicial independence. They said that that would modify the configuration, and by virtue of which civil society representatives would possibly change the majority vote in the council, so a higher number than that of prosecutors and judges, would be unconstitutional. However, they did not and could not possibly provide for a solution. So how much is too much? 2 members, 4 members? Could you change the composition of the council? What exactly is the constitutional requirement for a constitutional revision of Articles 131, 132 in the Constitution? The current government tries to do the same thing by increasing more moderately the number of civil society representatives, thinking that factions within the Superior Council of the Magistracy are splintered enough, so increasing it to 2 to 4 would change the voting configurations in the actual council. What is the conclusion to all this? A solution cannot be provided because these processes or these transformations are embedded in the nature of both the Union and the nation-state constitutions. A simple answer such as we should go back to the classical paradigm of nation-state constitutionalism is not at hand. Even the German Constitutional Court, which criticized the Lisbon Treaty in asset terms, could not provide a solution because they tried to build the reasoning of the decision around the immutable core of sovereignty. But traditionally speaking, the core functions of a sovereign state included, first and foremost, the possibility of coining money, which is already devolved to the Union. So it is hard to think of a way in which this trend will be reversed. On the other hand, these tensions cannot be solved either at the supranational level. So this presentation's lecture had to do with changes in the vocabulary of constitutionalists, both nation-state and supranational constitutionalists, which yield tensions that are irresolvable, impossible to reconcile within our current paradigm. Thank you. Other questions? Well, if there are none, let us call it a day.
No.